Okay, so here we go. We've done with the sciences, now we're getting into the arts, more or less, if economics can be considered an art. It's always been called the dismal science, but anyway, we'll get to that. So it's the 2023 Prize in Economics, Nobel Prize in Economics, the Sverigis Rick Bank Prize in Economics. It's presented in Sweden as opposed to the others that you're given in Norway. I think I say that. And it's a very new prize. It only started in 1969, so that is relatively new. It also means that this is the 54th year. The prize has only been given for 54 years. And in the 54 years, the United States has done unbelievably well. They've had 63 economics winners in 54 years. You do that because, of course, there are multiple winners in different categories, different years. Sometimes there's 3 or 4, well, 3 usually, who get the prize. So they've totally dominated it. We, Canada, have had 2, one of whom was quite a while ago. Well, not all that long ago. Let me see here. Well, yeah, in 2020, David Card, I believe his name was a multiple winner, a U.S. Canadian, and the other Canadian, actually, I have forgotten the name of the other Canadian.
Maybe Myron Scholes.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Excellent. So, the economists who have had it in the past, Samuelson, let's keep these glasses on. Paul Samuelson got it in the year after, so 69, he got it in 70. He's well known because he wrote a textbook, so most people who have ever taken an economics course know about Paul Samuelson. And the other one, famous name that everyone knows, I think, is Milton Friedman, who was a sort of laissez-faire economist that the Republicans dearly loved. So that's a little summary, and we'll now get into this one. And the prize, of course, went to Claudia Goldin, and she started off in a place that perhaps had a little more interest than some of the economic prizes. Oops, bottom. Safe sex. We'll get back to that, but it is actually important, I mean, to all of us, but also to the prize this year. And the winners are women. This prize is very much about women and how they progressed through society to become more important and have more significant place in the economy than they have. And we'll get back to the reasons. So, and it's all thanks to Claudia Goldin, who is actually a labor economist and historian, and she did it, as we'll get into, tracked out the history to show women's progress over the last 200 years to the real progress they've made. We'll get to that, the reasons for that, but it has something to do with safe sex. So there are only 3 women to get the prize in the past. Eleanor Ostrom got it in 2009 for economic governance, so government and how it affects economies. And Esther Duflo, who we covered here, was a wonderful prize she shared with one of the Canadians, and somebody called Kramer. And it had to do with how to improve the case for poverty, how to fix poverty in poverty-stricken reasons, and they did it by sampling and trying different solutions and comparing them. And if I remember correctly, it came out that the best thing you could do in a poverty-stricken nation to improve it was not improve the plantings or change the plots or the size, it was education for people. And that was the one when they tested against these others that had the most effect. So that's Esther Duflo. And there's one other interesting thing about it. She was at MIT. Her husband, Ajit Banerjee, was also at MIT, also a professor. And that has an echo in what's going on with us today, and Claudia Golden. So who is Claudia Golden? Well, she comes from quite a family. She's the Harvey Lee Professor of Economics at Harvard, and her husband, Lawrence Katz, is the Elizabeth Allison Professor. I don't know why they didn't give him the Harvey Lee, but that's the way it happened. And of course, where did they meet? Anybody? Harvard. So, but they're a charming couple. But they are from an overachieving family. This is their dog, Pika. Pika this is his actual title, excellent title in performance scent dogs. There's only 8 dogs in the States who have that title. So, and there he is with the awards. And he has so many ribbons. There's some pictures of him just covered with ribbons. So he's in the right family. She's an optimist. She started her career at Cornell as a microbiologist, and this is monkey virus and the stomach gut virus. So she is an optimist because even though she started in microbiology, which would seem a more sensible place, she still became an economist. And she took a PhD in Chicago, 71, and she's not just an economist. I'm not sure how many economists there are in the States, but she's acknowledged as one of the top 10. So she's truly a heavyweight. And she's the first female tenured professor in economics at Harvard. We just can't get away from it. Past president of the American Economics Association. And as I said before, she's interested in labor economics, female labor force, gender gaps in earnings, and income inequality. So, whoops. So here are some of her important books. She wrote the first one, The Race Between Education and Technology, with her husband, and it just ranks how education moves along with technology and sometimes falls behind and sometimes in front of. Again, she's interested in history and in trends. Journey Towards Equality of Princeton, book Career and Family, that's her area, and that's what we'll get into with why she won the prize. This was interesting. Women working longer, increased employment at older ages. Again, these are trends over the last 200 years, so she's looking at a fairly recent period where women have, the longer they've stayed longer in the labor market, and they've done better as time goes by. And gender conversion, we'll talk about that a little later, an important paper about how men and women's wages are going to come together. So why did she get the prize? Unlike the sciences, it's not because she did research. She actually looked at the literature and identified these trends and inflection points over the last couple of hundred years, and much more recently as well. So this is why she got it. Advanced our understanding of women's labor market outcomes, and she did it by uncovering key drivers of gender differences in the labor force. That was the deal. Her big findings was that, this goes back to the safe sex thing, things really changed after 1969 with the birth control pill, women were able to get back into the market, either stay out of the market, just keep in the market because they were taking the pill, or once they actually stopped taking the pill, had a child, they were able to get back in much more quickly. So the bulk of the, again, the point was the thing that holds women back, great that you could get a Nobel Prize for this, is childbirth, but no one had pinpointed the tremendous significance and drag that had on women's success in society. I keep missing the button. Oops, oops. How do I go back? This. Yes, okay. We're going to now hear from the woman herself. Just a little couple of minute run. And very worthwhile. You'll see, you'll realize immediately what a sort of dynamic character she is.
Hi, I'm Claudia Golden, Henry Lee Professor of Economics at Harvard University and author of Understanding the Gender Gap and the soon-to-be published Career and Family, Women's Century-Long Journey Toward Equity.
Why should they be held back? Simply because they are women.
So how can we achieve gender equity? To have gender equity, we must achieve it in two spheres, the family and the marketplace. These are two sides of the same coin, couple equity and gender equality. Now, men and women start out their careers fairly equally after graduation from college or professional school, but their careers soon diverge. Women, when they have children, tend to spend more time in childcare. Men tend to spend more time with their careers. But both lose. Women lose in terms of their careers, in terms of promotions and earnings, and men lose because they're not spending as much time with their children during those special moments. So the question is, why can't the couple do better? Why can't they split everything 50-50? And the answer is they could, but they would lose a fair amount of income. And the reason is because work is fairly greedy, and the individual who puts in more hours and is on call gets monumentally more. But what about other factors that are often mentioned, such as discrimination, negotiation skills, managerial bias? These are clearly important, and it's important to level the playing field all over. But until we do something about greedy work, until we do something about the fact that workplace flexibility is expensive, until we do something about the fact that women do more with their children, men do more with their careers, we're not going to achieve the two sides of the coin, which is couple equity and gender equality. Thank you very much.
I don't know, is this going to take me on? Right. So she explains that very well. That's exactly what I think she should give the, well, of course she should give the lecture rather than me. But it's worth going into in a little deeper to show what she did. And so what she identified this 200-year period, and from the early 19th century, there really was not much opportunity for women in men's areas. It was mechanized. In early 20th century, and we go into this in a little more detail on the next slide, there was the rise of clerical work. More women got into the work area, and the gap narrowed somewhat, not significantly. And then in the 80s, things really took off with, as we've talked about, we will again, childbirth and fewer responsibilities at home, or able to get out of them. So up to the 20s, women were just female workers. Everybody was more or less the same. They were female men. No one was counting who got what. Then in the 30s to the 50s, after more women had entered the labor market, there were some easing of constraints and so on. In the late 80s, what Ms. Golden called the quiet revolution begins, and that was where now women are getting better education. And a lot of this has to do with education. And when we're talking about these closing the gender gap, we're really talking about women with a college education, so that they were the top performing women naturally, and Golden is more interested in their success and in the way they competed with men. Not that you don't all the way down, high school and so on, but she focused on college-educated women. And yes, she also identified that after the birth control pill and into the 70s, career became more important significantly, and women identified more closely with having a career than they had previously, which was an important thing to note, and the time at which it happened. So yes, we've talked about this. It was because of oral contraceptives and, in her studies, divorce. So as I was showing this to Valmai, he said, "Divorce, are you kidding? Single mother's burden was 2 kids and not able to get back into the labor market and so on." Yes, that's true, except in many cases, or clearly in her study, she found that women who were divorced, college educated, we're talking about the top of the rank, were able to get back into the market and do almost as well as they had they continued in it. Not quite as well, but almost as well. But the divorce was one of the factors. So birth control pills, I don't know, if you don't take the pill, maybe you have more chance of getting married. But in any case, once they got divorced, on average, women did not get burdened with 2 kids and have to stay at home. So this is just a little graphic to show it. The couple starts out together, and that is important, that men and women start out together. In any study that they've done, initially you graduate from school, you are pretty much equal when you get first jobs and so on. And it's become more and more so. But then the woman gets pregnant, has a baby, and the husband continues along. Because she does talk about heterosexual couples. There are other kinds of couples, same sex and all of that, but she concentrated on heterosexual couples. And she's now looking up at his position, which is better. So she talks about temporal flexibility. So this is the woman's view. She has a job, but she's had a kid, so she has to stay home, work on her computer. That's flexible. Working from home, but try to keep up with her job. She has all these other responsibilities, and it's a tough road to hoe. You can easily be sidetracked with depression or anxiety, or just too damn busy. Of course, that compares to temporal flexibility, a father's view. Well, men don't get pregnant, so they don't have any of that problem we saw in the last slide. So this is an important date. It's the date at which women's salaries catch up with men. So what men had on January 1st, it took women these numbers of months to catch up for the annual salary. So a remuneration. So we're making progress. It's April 11th, so, you know, Mr. Golden only worked to January 1st. Mrs. Golden had to continue plowing on till April 12th in 2017 before she would have made the same amount that he had made in that year. So we've seen there's some progress, the 11th to the 9th to the 8th to the 23 actually was was quite exciting. There was a real draw. But now we're taking everybody included, not just, sorry, we're still talking about the elite women working full-time, and they're making 90%, so they're still not right there, depending somewhat on the profession or the area that you're in. So the gap is closest, and I asked Bill just before we started, how is it in medicine? Because she identified that as one where the gap is almost closed. And he said yes, in his view, women graduating in medicine have, well, have equal pay and opportunities as men. Of course, they all still could get pregnant and so on, and I see someone shaking their head here. But these are the ones that, in any case, Claudia Golden felt the gap was close, narrowest, and in some cases closed. So technology, yes, I think a woman who was writing programs and so on and could write code could do just as well as somebody who was male or female. It wouldn't matter. If you looked at their code, you couldn't tell, I suppose. You shouldn't be able to tell. You couldn't tell. And science, generally. Those are areas that she identified. And temporal flexibility, which we'll get to. It's expensive. The next slide we'll have a look. And to close the gap, it's not just up to women. The whole society has to get behind it. And we'll see how that. So these are suggestions that she had, that Golden had to close it. And she did that in the paper that I referred to earlier, the gender gap conversion. It's last chapter, so she's optimistic that this is going to happen, that it's going to close. You need built-in redundancy in a workplace, so that if one person is off because she's pregnant, or if a man was off because he was sick or whatever, the workplace has to be sufficiently large or aware that they can be replaced relatively easily. So you may need backup people. And yes, she talked about, you heard her in her lecture, she talks about greedy work. And that's what she means. She means that jobs can be very demanding. They demand that you work long hours, that you're there when the company wants you, and that is, as long as that's necessary, if you don't have built-in redundancy, you're not going to be able to close the gap. So, are we doing okay so far? Do you have any questions? We're okay? Okay. So that was what she said, but unions have had a lot more to say about it. And it's always been a priority with unions, but they've never been terribly successful at getting that point forward. They often work on hourly or increased vacations or whatever. They haven't really, in my view anyway, put their mind to this, but I think would be a good place for unions to work at. And they certainly are aware of what they would have to do. So make it a human rights priority. That would seem to me a very important thing. We considered equal pay for equal work just a standard thing. It was everybody's right. Legislation, card, check, phone access, okay. Collective bargaining. Expand pay equity, clearly. Make pay more equal. Increase the minimum wage. Yes, because the minimum wage will have some effect on this. Legislate equity compliance. Would be very important. It would be a key. I don't hear unions particularly pushing it, but and then, of course, the very important thing, sort of the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about, and Golden doesn't talk about it either, but it is universal childcare. That is really one of the things that you need. The female, going by my own experience, might feel a psychological responsibility more, and that is definitely something that has to be overcome, and the partner, men, have to recognize. But certainly universal childcare would help a great deal, so I congratulate the unions on that. Violence and harassment of women, yes, I mean, that is a huge issue. And it's a huge issue in the workplace, I think, in my limited experience in the workplace. It goes on. I've noticed it in my company, we'll talk about that in a minute, and in others. Men harass women at work. They truly do. And it will take a lot of education to get over that, because there is, as I say, in offices that I've worked in, there is some sort of sexual buzz going on, and it's the men preying on the women, I believe. That's open to debate. And then pay transparency. Companies don't like to have pay transparency because it doesn't work very well even between Bob and Paul. If Paul is getting more than Bob and they both feel, but it's even more important when it comes to women, and it's something important that's needed. So we're going to look at some of what it costs a small company, namely my company, and how we had to struggle somewhat financially to provide an even playing field for men and women. And the way it works when you're off, if you're pregnant or anything else, and the other reason, you get 15 weeks. This is the current one, which is much less generous than it used to be. You get earnings up to $650 from EI, employment insurance. And it can be extended to 35 weeks. You get $390, and you can share it. So that's why the 35 weeks is more important. You do a paternity thing. Women and men can share childcare, and either of you will, you have to make the arrangements, get the $390. So there are a lot of small businesses. I'm going to talk about a small business because larger businesses are more easily, it's easier to accommodate people when they're off if you have a larger staff. So there's 1.2 million businesses in Canada. I think we should all feel good about that. But 67% of the people work for companies with fewer than 100 employees. So that really is the bulk of them. And I picked 29 to 49 because I employed somewhere around between 35 and 40 employees. So that's why I took that. And there's 102 people that work for those companies, which is called a small business, but it's relatively, I like to think it's a little bit big if you have that many staffers. So we can look at the Parker's Channels. That was the name of my company, and we published medical magazines. We had three titles, a travel magazine for doctors, a clinical learning magazine that taught different specialties and was used quite extensively by residents in Canada when we would do it. We split up the medical area into parts by specialty, and then we would find a senior doctor to edit the volume. Then when I say volume, it could be more than one issue. Say in cardiology, I think we had 3 issues, and it was published over a 36 issue game. Then we had a newspaper, a clinical newspaper, which was very different from an editorial point of view. And I think I'm using this example because I think companies are mixed. They're not you can't easily replace everyone. And in fact, in this company, even in my company, even though we only had 3 publications, one was a newspaper, one was this textbook type thing, and the other was a travel magazine. And you couldn't take the travel editor and put her in charge of the newspaper. And incidentally, they were all women, my editorial. So then that's the editorial side. Then on sales is more malleable. You can move people around more easily in sales. But there are still, this is a relatively small market we had, so certain clients had favorites and so on. So if Jeff was gone, they didn't want to work with Sally, or weren't as effective. They thought, oh, we'll wait till Jeff comes back. So there was that sort of thing. And then in administration, the administration, at least in my company, had a couple of VPs at different times. You really had to know the whole operation and be ready to jump in addition to doing the normal administration and keeping people happy, making sure that, you know, there are places to park, or just generally looking after a staff of 30 to 40 people. And again, not flexible. You really couldn't easily replace or fill in for that top administrator. And I over the period of the business, I had both male and female, what I was supposed to call executive VPs in my small company. So this is kind of how it could work out in a 4-month absence. And these numbers may seem relatively small to you, but when you're running a company of the size with 30 people, it was expensive to lose this kind of money. So an editor getting $100,000 to cover for 15 weeks, 5,000 a month, roughly 20,000. You would have to then, once she was gone, and then you had to replace her, of course, in some way. And you'd try to replace her with an associate editor's skill. So if you knew someone was off, you would try to make sure that that employee was trained and ready to take over from the editor. And that would depend on personality. Some editors played it very close to their chest and didn't want to share with the associate editor, and others were better at it. So you had to make sure that the associate editor in each of these publications was up to speed. And we depended heavily on freelance, on assignments, and how the whole thing worked. So you probably would need additional editorial staff. So for a 4-month absence for one of the editors, and I would say this is a minimum, but it would cost $30,000, which doesn't sound like much, I guess, but to a company that's grinding along and getting all the sales they can and keeping the lights on and the heat and paying for cars for people and so on, $30,000 is a lot of money. Bookkeeper, similarly very important. You can replace the bookkeeper, but that's going to cost you considerably, and there's a training period, and there's the complication that they don't understand your company as well as your previous bookkeeper. Director of marketing, higher salary, hard to replace because of their because they know what the salespeople are doing, and they know the clients better. In the case of this, we're talking about a small business. So the director of marketing, very important. And if they were off, I would say vice president, irreplaceable. Yes, if there's one person running a company and they're off for 4 months, that's the end of it. Except, fortunately, it was usually me, and I didn't get sick. So, but we had sometimes. But the other thing is, when you have people off this way, for childbirth, or for sickness, or for depression, or for accidents, or for marital strife, for all the things that can happen with a group of people, it affects the expectation of everyone else. And if someone is if the company seems to be kowtowing to the needs of one important over another, particularly in this aspect, it can be a difficult managing challenge to keep everybody happy while some key people are, particularly key people, are off. So we have another little run from Claudia, who's going to tell us about.
I'm very honored. There are many people whom I would like to thank. At the very top of the list, I thank those who have shown me by what they do, by how they think, the importance of really big ideas in history and the enormous importance of long-term change. I have worked very hard to try to change the representation of women in economics. I've often been asked what I have benefited from in terms of women entering the field of economics. What I've benefited from the most is the ability to work with women. I am a teacher. I am a professor. I could never do research without doing teaching. When I teach, I am forced to confront what I think is the truth. I am forced to confront it by telling my students, and they're pretty smart. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, they know it. And so therefore, I deeply thank my students who push me to the frontiers of knowledge every day. I can never be where I am today without them. So thank you very much.
Wonderful woman. I think I really, the more research I did about this woman, better I thought she was. And I noticed there she had the dog. She had, Lawrence and Pika were with her. So she taught, and you want to know, I guess the success of a teacher is what her students think of her. So I have a few quotes from some of her students, just to give you an idea about what kind of a woman she was. One of them said that she documented the changes of roles of women in a society when male economists just didn't care. They just didn't even notice that this was a problem. So here's a quote from Betsu Stevenson, graduated in 2001. And she said of Golden, all these are about Golden, she understood that work and life are intertwined. The prize reflects her vision to be able to see how women's expectations for life were being reshaped over time as opportunities shifted, as social costs and benefits shifted, as financial costs and benefits shifted, and her tireless work as a data detective to factually document them. And she called herself a detective. She occasionally would refer to herself as a detective, so that was interesting. Marcella Eslin in 2005 had just had a baby. And she said, Golden stopped me and asked me to sit down. And she called me by my name, which was revolutionary for her grad students. She first asked me, how was my young family? She recognized that I'd been pregnant and that I had another child at home, and she asked me what I was working on. She saw my duality as both a mother and a scholar, and she embraced both of them. And I do think I was special to think she did. And I do think she was special because she did that for so many women and for men as well. I'll read you just a couple more. Carla Friedman graduated in 2006. These are all people who went to Harvard. And incidentally, I didn't mention this at the time, Claudia had 2 children, a man who's in tech, and a daughter who is still at Harvard. So that was her kids. So Carla Friedman, she has a PhD in economics because of her. She's incredibly curious, and not only about things that she works on. She's not an accommodating mentor. She pushes you, she wants you to work hard and to think deeply and to try to things right, but is also incredibly welcoming. And the last one, I found this one particularly interesting. She started when she was a graduate student, and she was at the National Bureau of Economic Research and was playing the flute in the graduate student orchestra. Claudia said, "What do you know about blind auditions?" And I said, "I know nothing." "Why?" And she said, "Because a student of mine had a throwaway line in a paper where she said, and of course the use of blind auditions increased the presence of women in symphony orchestras." So right up Claudia's alley. So that's it. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Okay.
David.
Sure.
I want to go back to on the labor economics side of it. During the Second World War, a lot of women moved into the labor force, went into jobs that men otherwise would have held. Did Claudia ever look at that and say they got paid the same as, riveter's a riveter?
I wondered about that too. No, she did not address the whole World War II thing, which was an obvious place to go.
I love your presentation. I fear women have got far more opposition than you are telling us. I'm a specialist in the dental field, and quite frankly, women were ignored or passed. My class of 5 women and 40 men. So who got what?
Incredible.
And the women that went into the subject, nowadays it's changed a bit. In those days, if you didn't think you got a husband, you took a profession. And dentistry was one of the things that women could do, and did. And I'm thrilled that you were doing what you're doing, but I think you maybe need a bit of catching up on how far women have got. I think they've got far well beyond this. They don't have to apologize anymore. And
Right.
when you think of what happened to Candace Pert, I'm sure you know of, the molecules of emotion.
Yes.
She got trodden on so hard by the men that she threw her hands up in disgust and went off and set out on her own and did splendidly. And then I would think even the Nobel Prize in 1956, the males that won that, the 3 of them that won that, and the woman that was involved was ignored. You know that. And I subscribe to the Scientific American, and it's bringing this up all the time. Thank goodness it's changing. But, oh dear, we have a way to go.
Yes, I agree. And
And every woman I hear will tell you, unpaid labor.
Yeah. Well, and she's aware of it. She doesn't tromp on it as hard as she might, perhaps, but she certainly makes the case. And she's, as I said earlier on, she's optimistic. She thinks this is gradually going to.
Does she know her history?
She seems to. For the last 200 years, from an economics point of view, she does. Although she didn't mention World War II.
One of the things today is to be concerned that the males are falling behind. So you take in, like in schools, I used to be in charge of the awards committee, and for every 7 or 8 females, we get a male. And we used to call them the token wall, which was one time it would be the girls would be the token. But, so it's a big concern today that the boys are falling. And
That's
medical
academically done. I think that's academically speaking rather than financial.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
even in
academic.
medical schools
Yes.
and law and things like that, they're
women are.
There's
And
more
she's
women.
mentioned it,
The only
women-
problem is the problem with children. Because
Right.
when they leave.
But, yes, but she does make that point, that
Yeah.
academically, women have outstripped men for several years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many years. And certainly even, I can remember when I was in school, I think the top 4 people in our class of 35, with, I think we had 6 females, and the 4 top people in the class were women.
It strikes me that her thesis is amazingly obvious for a Nobel Prize. That is, that the pill profoundly affected the status of women in the workplace. I mean, duh, you know? And so that for that to win a Nobel Prize seems odd to me.
I agree, but she has the papers in the background and so on, and wrote the papers to prove it. Yes, she says she was a detective. She looked at things. She didn't do original research. What can we say? She's a kind of formidable person as an academic. I think we got a sense of that from the 2 video clips. But yes,
Yeah.
hindsight, you could say, what? But of course, she didn't just say it. She did have credentials and standing in the economic community. That's a good point.
Yeah, I was saying to David before he started, you know, I think well, you showed, the last slide I showed the last week showed the number of females winning Nobel Prizes in the sciences, a very small number. But that's really going to dramatically change in the next 10 to 15 years, because there's so many women who've gone into science now. They're at the lower level or the middle level now. So they're going to poach a lot of these positions that men had taken. The other thing too, the question about World War II, the Grumman Corporation
Yeah.
was clearly way ahead in World War II. I think that at their peak they had 40,000 employees cranking out warplanes. They had very modern, I mean, they had child care, the salaries were equal, the opportunities were equal at Grumman. Now, I have to say that didn't continue after the war, but for the time, they certainly recognized that, and yeah. But and the other thing in the science prize is a couple of those women, Bertozzi, who won the chemistry prize last year. She's a delight, and she has she's very encouraging to both. In a sense, it's almost a sex-blind lab in who I mean, it's a very collaborative
Right.
department, and I think that's the kind that are coming to the top. So things are changing.
No, I think that part of what you were saying, and check me on this, is that the great equalizer was the number of occupations that opened up over the last 50 years.
Right.
When I started to work, which is a long time ago, there were some occupations, mathematicians, etc., were open then. But there were other occupations that didn't appear to be open except to new immigrants, which is engineering, that kind of stuff. But those are all open.
But I agree, Gina, and as I went through it, I thought, it's great, I think it's a wonderful thing, she got the prize and so on, she clearly deserves it, but is this fairly obvious?
Well, she had a platform. She's at Harvard.
Yeah, exactly.
And
her children is at
like a
Harvard.
woman last week, Keelan, from Hungary,
Right,
who really came up a much tougher route, I think.
yeah.
So, not to diminish her,
No.
her contribution, but,
And
yeah.
I have a feeling that underlying her contribution she said she's a data detective. She was seeing what others did not.
Didn't see. That is the point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
She uncovered it. She realized it was there.
and it was important.
But who
Yes.
didn't see that? Who didn't see that the pill had a dramatic effect on women?
Well,
in the
economists didn't see it. It wasn't that everybody else didn't
But
see
they
it.
were male.
Yes, the male economists didn't get it. That really was, and again, it's important to remember that she had come up as an economist, which it was a male-dominated profession, and she had risen to the top with all the other papers, the dozens and dozens and dozens of papers that she printed. She had the credentials. She was the one when she said, "This is it," they had to believe her.
David, how old is she?
She's 77.
Okay, did she have a family?
She had 2 kids.
2 kids, so she knows from
And both the
experience.
kids are over, I don't know how old they are, but they're in the workforce. One's at Harvard. One,
That's the workforce.
So she
And-
knows from
and
experience.
the boy is in, yeah, she knew what it was like.
When you say she's at Harvard, you mean on the faculty at Harvard or a
No,
student?
so her daughter is studying economics at Harvard.
But she's a prof at Harvard.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
she's
she's a
77?
tenured professor at Harvard,
She's a
yes.
tenured
She's
professor.
77 and she has a daughter at Harvard? Seems odd.
Well,
She
it
does.
happened in the Bible.
It didn't,
Yes.
it didn't say how,
So,
it didn't say how old
so
the
we're
kids
told.
were. Yes,
Did she look to the future at all, or just work with the history of the pill?
just the history, as far
That's a
as
shame.
I can see in the papers that she's done. She
There's
got to the
nothing-
point, the only stuff looking to the history is the conversion thing, when the conversions, when is it going to close the gap? But she didn't go beyond that.
Yeah, because the labor force is going to change so dramatically coming. Interesting.
Well, yes,
I guess what I would like to know a little bit more is the percentage of elite women we're speaking of here in proportion to the population as a whole. I think it's fairly narrow, I'm guessing. And so really, you know, we're talking 10%, are we? Possibly of women who are achieving this equality. I think culturally, the depth of how culturally
Well-
women are less than men
you know what,
will keep a
yeah.
huge percentage of female.
Although it's surprising, we were talking today about Young and Ernst.
Yeah.
The CEO is a woman. We talked about IKEA, it's being run by a woman. And we're not aware of it, we don't think of it that way. It's still, at least for our generation, it's kind of, oh my God, really, that's surprising. But as Bill says, I think that's going to become less and less
Try
remarkable.
the US top Fortune 500. How many women are in charge of companies?
You know what, I'll do more research on it and I'll have it for you
Less
next
than
week.
20%.
I'll have some, yes, I'm sure that's true. I will do more research though and get you some percentages.
I'll just mention that Gwynne Shotwell, a woman, is in charge of SpaceX. And it's gone from a
Yeah,
$100,000 company to a $150 billion company. So she's doing pretty good.
yeah. No, there's no question that all that talent, all these hundreds of years was not, well, I can't even say it's put to good use. They raised wonderful.
Yeah, because that's the problem is, I mean, that's the issue, really. Because of course women can do the job just as good, if not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, so there are some really good men, there's some really good women. But the problem is, or the issue is, the childcare. Because we do need
It's
children.
childcare. Yeah.
And when you got your female doctors working part-time, you know, and then they don't want you going to a walk-in clinic because it costs them money and that, but you can't get in to see them for weeks because, you know, and I know the law, a lawyer friend of mine was telling me that they have that problem too with female lawyers. So it costs the same money to educate these people, and I mean, because we are subsidized here in Canada, but he said the amount of work. So I think it's the hours, I mean, we have to keep producing children.
keep the world going.
the greedy work. I mean,
And
I
and
thought
you
that
be able to
the,
enjoy it.
yeah, I think that the union, that union slide I had the most comprehensive solution, and it's not an easy thing. It's got to be from the ground up. We really have to rethink things and think about these roles and think about, you know, it just brings up so many issues. How important is it to have the mother in the home for the first 3 years or 2 years, or what's the optimum thing? Or can you have the man in the home for the whole 2 years? What's the outcome among children? So it does raise a lot of issues.
Usually
But,
that's going to get a buy.
Sorry?
Usually you bypass the guy to ask the boss to get a
Yes.
buy to do what they want to do.
Right.
David, I had a thought,
Yes.
unusual.
But male,
Of course.
Male thoughts, yes.
One of the subjects I had in school was economics.
Yes.
Actually, it was a major. As a compliment to you, your figures, one of the figures was 30,000, your cost. If I've got it right, you were in your company a few years ago, so your cost factor with inflation might be closer to the fact that you had to pay 40 to 50,000.
Yes, Valmai thought, and the figure doesn't look, I was a little concerned because I didn't think the figures were sufficiently strong to sort of blow you away. But yes, they'd be much higher now. And I mentioned it in the company that size. It's really disruptive if a senior person leaves. I had started the company from the beginning from an editorial point of view and gone into sales. So I had a sense of what was needed in both sides so that I could kind of step in. But subsequently, when I later had someone running the company for me, I tried a man. He was great. He was a great salesman, and that was terrific for the bottom line. He left, and I appointed a woman who was a great editor. She was fantastic, and she was okay on sales, but she wasn't what David had been, say. So the product was great, probably better than when David was running it, but the sales were not as strong. So you do pay for it. So thank you, that was it. Next week, Valmai and I are sharing, somewhat sharing, sharing, yes, the responsibilities to tell you about.
you can hardly do
Gotta be careful.
Treading dangerously.
We are.
After this
Valmai
lecture.
is doing a brief introduction to your lecture on the Peace Prize.
Yes, it's the Peace Prize, and the winner is a woman. Narges Mohammadi. She's in Iran. She's in prison. We don't know if we were speculating, are they going to let her out to take the prize? She is head of something. She's a vice president of something called Defenders of Human Rights in Iran. The president is somebody called Shireen Adadi, who won the prize in 2003, also from Iran. So that's interesting, and I hope you'll all come and hear about her, and I hope I'll know more about her by next week.